Welcome to Minds of Madness, the series where we research and investigate some of the most deranged individuals the world has ever seen. This is a Patreon-only series because we do not hold back in terms of keeping them ad-friendly, and the support over on Patreon allows us to do this. But we thought we would share this particularly disturbing case with everyone on YouTube. If you enjoy this documentary, you will love all of our other work over on Patreon, including our Murderous Minds series, where we look into the world's most notorious and often little-known serial killers in a very similar format to this video you're about to watch. So if you want more, head on over to Patreon. We'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of our patrons for allowing us to keep this up. And now we would like to present you all with the horrifying story of Christopher Duntsch, the mad surgeon who left medical instruments in his patients and caused untold pain and terror to all of his victims. In the summer of 2015, investigators in Dallas finally homed in on a target they'd been seeking to put behind bars for months. Christopher Duntsch, a former neurosurgeon who'd recently had his medical license revoked, didn't seem like a cold-blooded killer. But in an email he'd written in 2011, he described himself as just that. Across the span of just 2 years, Duntsch had severely injured and maimed 33 out of his 38 patients, leaving many of them paralysed and wheelchair-bound. He also killed 2 other patients. His crimes earned him the nickname Dr. Death and a place in the O.B. Ellis unit, a prison located in Walker County, Texas. But who exactly was Duntsch, and how did he manage to get away with his gross negligence for so long? In this documentary, we aim to answer these questions, and many more, as we dive into the life and crimes of Christopher Duntsch. Christopher Daniel Duntsch was born in Montana on April 3, 1971, to parents Donald and Susan. Susan was a school teacher, while Donald was a physical therapist and Christian missionary. The family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where Duntsch spent most of his childhood attending and eventually graduating from Evangelical Christian School, located in the Cordova suburb of the city. According to an article written by ProPublica, Donald had been a gridiron standout in Montana as a football player, and Duntsch wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. He joined the football team himself in high school, where he played as a linebacker. His classmates remembered Duntsch for his determination, stating, "He had his goal, his sight on a goal, and whatever it took to get there. He wanted to go to college and play, and I can recall he was like 180 pounds and said, 'I need to get to 220 in order to be a linebacker at Colorado or Colorado State.'" However, despite his resolve, Duntsch was not known to be the most talented player. After high school, he attended Millsaps College in Mississippi with financial aid and joined their football team, but spent his days longing to transfer and play linebacker for a Division I team, setting his sights specifically on the Colorado State Rams. In his sophomore year, Duntsch managed to make it as one of the team's few walk-on players, which is where his athletic failings began to show. His teammates recalled that he struggled to do basic drills, but would ask to do them over and over again, sure that he could tackle them with enough practice. Eventually, however, Duntsch left the team and transferred back to the University of Memphis. He still wanted to play football, but was unable to because of his multiple transfers, which removed his eligibility. Following the disappointment of no longer being able to play football, Duntsch changed his plan and his studies, specifically turning his attention to medicine. He completed his undergrad degree in 1995 and then continued on to an ambitious MD-PhD program. For part of this initiative, Duntsch worked in a research lab, studying the origins of brain cancer and the various uses of stem cells. He earned these degrees in 2001 and 2002. While doing his surgical residency afterwards, Duntsch teamed up with 2 Russian scientists who'd been recruited by the University of Tennessee to explore the commercial potential of stem cells to fortify people with poorly backs. Together, the trio patented technology to obtain and grow disc stem cells, and in 2008 they launched DiscGenix, which aimed to develop and sell such products. 2 of Duntsch's university superiors were amongst the first investors. On the surface, it looked as if the former football player had found his calling and was finally thriving. But friends and acquaintances later on would paint a different story of the medical student, describing one particular all-night drug-fueled birthday celebration halfway through Duntsch's residency, where he and his friends indulged in the excessive consumption of alcohol and took various illegal substances, including cocaine and pills. Then at dawn, Duntsch put on his white lab coat and left to do his rounds at the hospital. One woman, who was the girlfriend of a friend at the time, told the courts, "After you've spent a night using cocaine, most people become paranoid and want to stay in the house. He was totally fine going to work." One of his friends later stated they would never allow Duntsch to operate on them. But this was just the beginning of the neurosurgeon's troubles. An early investor in DiscGenix, Rand Page, stated while he was initially dazzled by Duntsch and the way he presented his company, he became concerned and cautious over time. "We would meet in the mornings and he would be mixing a vodka orange juice to start the day." Page also once found cocaine and a rolled up dollar bill in Duntsch's home office desk drawer. Ultimately, the medical student's interest in substance abuse and alcoholism cost him his company. He was forced out, and his partners and investors sued him over money and stock. Page later said, "I don't think his plan was ever to become a surgeon. When he lost that income, I think the decision was made for him that he was going to have to enter into the medical community to support himself." The University of Tennessee never commented on Duntsch or his case publicly, but Dr. Frederick Boop, the chief of neurosurgery there, was caught on recording and admitted to knowing about the student's failings. In 2012, Boop was approached by a Texas-based doctor who was alarmed by Duntsch's surgical errors. Boop acknowledged that an anonymous woman had filed a complaint against him as a student, claiming that he was using drugs before attending to patients. University officials took the report seriously and asked Duntsch to take a drugs test, but he avoided it by vanishing for a few days. Upon his return, he was sent to a program for impaired physicians for several months, and for the remainder of his residency, he was under supervision. By 2010, Duntsch had completed his neurosurgery residency program at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, and subsequently completed a spine fellowship program at the Semmes Murphy Clinic in Memphis. Following Duntsch's later arrest in 2015, the Dallas District Attorney's Office subpoenaed every hospital on the surgeon's CV, requesting records of his surgeries, including those he did during his residency. It was discovered that by the time he completed the residency, he had carried out fewer than 100 surgeries. Typically, the number of operations carried out by neurosurgery residents is about 1,000. In 2011, while still in Memphis, Duntsch met Wendy Reen Young, a 27-year-old exotic dancer. Duntsch was now 40, and the pair met at a bar and hit it off. Wendy recalled that after sharing a few drinks, they returned to the surgeon's house, where they danced in his office under a disco ball. From there, things moved fast. "We talked about marriage pretty quickly," Wendy recalled while speaking with D Magazine. "We moved in together within 3 months, and then I became pregnant." At this point in time, Duntsch was looking for a job. He reportedly had offers from New York and San Diego, but opted to take a position in Dallas. Wendy agreed to go with him because he had family there. So they moved into a 5-bedroom house near Duntsch's workplace, and Wendy gave birth to their first child together, a son they named Aiden. However, soon after the move, Duntsch began to have an affair with his assistant, Kimberly Morgan, who later stated the two spent romantic time together in his work office, where she noted he kept a flask of vodka. According to Wendy, Morgan was at the house often, but she assumed it was just to do with work. She was unaware that Duntsch had told the assistant that Wendy was just a friend, not his partner and the mother of his son. At the end of 2013, around the time Duntsch was stripped of his medical license and declared bankrupt, Wendy fell pregnant with their second child, Preston, whom she delivered in September of 2014. By this point, the couple had already split, and Wendy was living with her sister in Garland, Texas. By the time that Wendy and Duntsch met, the surgeon was over $500,000 in debt. Early in his career, he focused heavily on the PhD part of his degree. His name appeared on several papers, and he spent his time concentrating on dysgenics before he was ousted. Due to the high debts he had, Duntsch decided that it would be best for him to take a job as a neurosurgeon. In the summer of 2011, he and Wendy moved to Dallas so he could work at what is now known as Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Collin County and Denton County, Texas. He was brought on as a minimally invasive spine surgeon with an annual salary of $600,000 plus bonuses. Duntsch looked very qualified on paper. He had spent 15 years in training, and his CV was 12 pages long. The medical center later claimed that they had been told the surgeon was one of the best and smartest neurosurgeons they had ever trained, as they went on at length about his strengths. Furthermore, when Baylor Plano asked about his weaknesses or areas which required improvement, the supervising physician communicated that the only weakness Duntsch had was that he took on too many tasks for one person. Also around this time, Dr. Frederick Boop faxed a recommendation to the hospital, checking off good or excellent in boxes about Duntsch's skills, and noting Chris is extremely bright and possibly the hardest working person I've ever met. Dr. John Robertson, a supervisor of Duntsch's and an old family friend, who was an investor in dysgenics, noted on his recommendation that the surgeon had an excellent work ethic. However, shortly after joining Baylor Plano, Duntsch began to rub people the wrong way and made a poor impression on his colleagues. Veteran vascular surgeon Randall Kirby recalled that Duntsch frequently boasted about his abilities, despite being so new. Kirby stated, "Duntsch is among giants up there, and he was trying to tell me over and over again how most of the spine surgery here in Dallas was being done inappropriately, and that he was going to clean this town up." He later added, his performance was pathetic. He was functioning at a first or second year neurosurgical resident level, but had no apparent insight into how bad his technique was. Quickly, Duntsch began to fall out with other doctors over whether or not he was fulfilling his obligations. In one particular instance in September of 2011, he was heavily criticized by his colleagues for failing to care for a patient when he opted to go to Las Vegas instead. But things only got worse from here when Duntsch began to wield a surgical knife. In November of 2011, Duntsch carried out surgery on Kenneth Fennell, who was the first surgical patient of his since he joined Baylor Plano. Fennell recalled that the surgeon told him the following morning that it went great, that it worked. However, it turned out that Duntsch had operated on the wrong part of Fennell's back, and he was left in significant pain. He underwent a second surgery with Duntsch later on when he moved to Dallas Medical Center, and woke from the operation with severely paralyzed legs, after Duntsch had removed part of his femoral nerve. Fennell required months of rehab so that he could walk with a cane, and even still, his physical movement is limited. He can't walk more than 30 feet or stand for more than a few minutes without needing to sit down again. Duntsch's next victim was a man named Lee Passmore, a Collin County medical investigator who was operated on December 12, 2011. Passmore had undergone surgery once before, but the pain in his back had returned. His pain specialist told him that while he didn't have a regular surgeon to recommend, he had recently had lunch with a surgeon who seemed like a guy that knew what he was talking about. He then gave Passmore Duntsch's details, and the two arranged for the operation to take place. However, the surgery was a disaster. During the operation, Duntsch cut a ligament that was not normally touched during this kind of procedure. Furthermore, he misplaced hardware in Passmore's spine and placed a screw which kept the hardware in place in the wrong location in the spine. He then stripped the screws of its thread so that it could not be removed. According to other surgeons, even if the threads hadn't been removed, The screw was in a location where if it was removed, it would lead Passmore to bleed out. Vascular surgeon Mark Hoyle, who assisted with the operation, later recalled that Duntsch seemed oblivious to the copious amounts of bleeding. He became so disturbed by the surgeon's actions that at one point he physically restrained him. He reportedly later told Duntsch that he was dangerous. The surgeon's behaviour led Hoyle to wonder if he was mentally sound. Passmore was left with chronic pain and limited mobility. Duntsch's work did not improve from here. Barry Morgulov was the owner of a pool service company, and over the years had injured and worn out his back after assisting with his father's import business, where he unloaded trucks. He had previously had back surgery, but the aching had returned, and a pain specialist gave him Duntsch's card. He recalled being impressed with the surgeon, stating, "Phenomenal, great guy, loved him." He later added, "I can fix you," was like the magic word. Boom, that's all I heard. I thought he was going to be the man to help me walk again. Margolov went in for an anterior lumbar spinal fusion on January 11, 2012. However, during surgery, Duntsch once again botched things when he attempted to pull a damaged disc from the spine using a grab tool instead of a scalpel. Vascular surgeon Randall Kirby argued with Duntsch and offered to take over, ultimately leaving the surgery when Duntsch refused to relinquish his scalpel. The surgeon also continued to make mistakes, even after having the correct anatomy pointed out to him. As a result of this bungled operation, where bone fragments were left in the spinal canal, Morgulov was left without most of the function of his left side and required a wheelchair. He recalled, "I woke up in recovery room and felt like I had been hit by a truck. I had never experienced pain of this type before." Morgulov also noted that the quality of his life changed drastically, leading him to some dark places. "I went to a psychiatric facility to keep from killing myself. It was hard. I didn't do it. I tasted the barrel of the 9mm and it was very hard to go on, but I had a wife and child." Morgulov also later walked out of a follow-up appointment with Duntsch when he showed signs of being drunk. As of 2018, Morgulov noted that some of the damage in his body was repaired afterwards, but he still has to use a cane to walk. As scar tissue builds up, his pain will worsen and the range of motion he has will decrease. One day, he will be confined again to a wheelchair. The following month, Jerry Summers, a longtime friend of Duntsch, came to Baylor Plano to have 2 neck vertebrae fused. Summers had played football with the surgeon in high school, had assisted with logistics at the research lab during his residency, and had helped him move into his practice. The two friends had lived for a short time together in a downtown luxury high-rise apartment, while Duntsch was looking for a house. Summers had suffered chronic back pain since he was injured in a high school football game, and it was worsened in a car accident in adulthood. Doctors who later reviewed the case noted that during the operation, Duntsch had damaged Summers' vertebral artery, causing it to bleed almost uncontrollably. He lost 1,200 milliliters of blood, more than a fifth of his blood volume, and almost 24 times the typical amount lost in a spinal fusion. To stop the loss, Duntsch packed the space with so much anticoagulant gel foam that it squeezed Summers' spine. Nurses and other staff during the operation fully expected the surgeon to perform a revision operation, but he refused. Summers became depressed following the procedure, which left him paralyzed from the neck down. His then girlfriend, Jennifer Miller, recalled, "Jerry was calm with Chris, but all Jerry would say to me is, 'I want to die, kill me.'" A few days afterwards, Summer told staff that he and Duntsch had used cocaine the night before and the morning of his surgery. As a result of this claim, the surgeon was forced to take a drug test, which he passed. Hospital officials then put him on leave pending a peer review. He was cleared to resume operating while the review was underway, but was told to limit himself to minor surgeries until it was over. Summers later recanted his allegations. In his 2017 deposition, he stated that he had made the story up because he felt he had been abandoned by somebody he considered a close friend. "I was just really mad and hollering and wanted him to be there, and so I made a statement that was not something that was necessarily true. The statement was only made so that he might hear it and go, 'Let me get my ass down there.'" Summers died in 2021 from an infection related to complications from the operation that Duntsch had botched. Still, this pattern of behaviour from Duntsch did not see him suspended, nor was his licence revoked. He continued to operate, even with his horrific track record. Kelly Martin was a 54-year-old schoolteacher who had plans to visit Antigua with her husband following her surgery. However, after she missed a step on a ladder, she fell and ended up with a herniated disc in her back. When physical therapy and muscle relaxers didn't do the trick, her doctor recommended she undergo a simple, minor surgery to repair the disc. She was pointed in the direction of Duntsch. During the surgery, he cut a blood vessel and tore a hole in a vein, and continued on with the operation, despite the fact that Martin was losing tremendous amounts of blood. Duntsch refused to abort the surgery, even when his colleagues warned him of blood loss. His denial that there was anything wrong hindered the ICU team's efforts to save her. After Martin woke from her operation, she began screaming and clawing at her legs, forcing the team to sedate her. Staff at the hospital noted that Duntsch stayed out of the waiting room, filling in his paperwork and writing notes rather than attending to his patient. Ultimately, Martin bled to death as a result of a hemorrhagic cardiac arrest. She never woke up after being sedated. Following her demise, Duntsch was asked to participate once more in a drug test. His first came back diluted with water, while his second was clean. He also passed a psychological evaluation. An extensive review of Duntsch and his performance as a surgeon was carried out, and it was determined that he had failed to meet the hospital's standards of care. They permanently revoked his surgical privileges at Baylor Plano, and another peer review was initiated. However, so that the medical center could avoid the costs of fighting, and possibly losing, a wrongful termination suit, hospital officials reached a deal with Duntsch's lawyers, in which he was allowed to resign, in exchange for Baylor Plano issuing a letter stating there were no issues with him, leaving him free to continue with his ways. Notably, if Duntsch had been fired, Baylor Plano would have been obligated to report him to the NPDB, or the National Practitioner Data Bank. The NPDB was established in 1990 and is intended to flag problematic doctors by tracking malpractice lawsuits and adverse actions against doctors, such as being barred, being fired, being suspended, or having their medical license suspended or revoked. While a good idea in theory, there certainly are loopholes. Not only are there ways to avoid reporting people like Duntsch, some of which will be more apparent as we explore this case further, but the information contained in the NPDB is not available to the public or to other doctors, only to hospital administrators. According to a 2008 report by ProPublica, many hospitals hesitate to submit reports to the bank, concerned that it may hurt doctors' job prospects or prompt lawsuits. One lawyer, Kay Van Wee, who later represented some of Duntsch's clients, stated, if Dr. Duntsch was unable to get privileges at other hospitals, theoretically, Dr. Duntsch could have sued Baylor and said, look, I could be making $2 million a year here. You owe me $2 million for the rest of my life. A report by Public Citizen, a consumer watchdog group, claimed that by 2009, about half of the hospitals in the United States had never reported a doctor to the NPDB. Reportedly, a more recent analysis showed that nothing much had changed in the years since. Another way to discipline Duntsch would have been to report him to the Texas Medical Board. While these kinds of things can often move slowly, if enough strong evidence was submitted by the hospital, the board could have acted immediately to protect patients from harm. A Dallas pulmonologist, who was on the medical board in 2012, Dr. Alan Solkin, stated, had Baylor's actions been reported appropriately, I would anticipate the board would have met within days to have an immediate suspension. He added that an investigation would then be carried out, and Duntsch would not be allowed to operate until after its completion. He also criticised the hospitals and their staff for not reporting him sooner. What's the worst thing that can happen? A lawsuit? Come on, these are people dying. And we're stopping because you're afraid of a lawsuit. More interestingly still, 2 years after Duntsch left Baylor, in 2014, the hospital's decision not to report its review for his work was investigated by state health authorities. Following its conclusion, the hospital was issued a violation and fined $100,000. However, the following year, both were withdrawn. The Texas Health and Human Services Commission would not explain why, saying the records were confidential. Upon leaving Baylor Plano, Duntsch moved to the Dallas Medical Center in the City of Farmers Branch located in Dallas County. While his reference checks were ongoing, the surgeon was granted temporary privileges. This allowed him to continue to operate on patients. Red flags were raised early on during Duntsch's time here, as nurses speculated that he was under the influence of drugs, and staff reported that he appeared to turn up to work sometimes wearing the same pair of scrubs several days in a row. On July 24, 2012, less than a week after Duntsch joined the hospital, he operated on his next patient. Floella Brown was a 64-year-old banker who was close to retirement and wanted to undergo cervical spine surgery, which she hoped would ease her neck and shoulder pain. The surgery appeared to be going fine until about half an hour into her surgery, when Duntsch reported that he was having trouble seeing her spine. One of the nurses in the room, Kyle Kissinger, recalled, "He was saying, 'There's so much blood I can't see this.'" Duntsch also kept ordering the scrub technician to suck more. "Get that blood out of there, I can't see." Kissinger stated, "That's really concerning to me, because not only that he can't do it correctly when he can't see that, but why is it still bleeding?" In the recovery room, Brown said that she felt okay and was visited by several family members. However, by 5 o'clock the following morning, she was convulsing and she eventually lost consciousness. It was reported that there was pressure building up inside her brain, although at the time nobody knew why. Duntsch, for his part, could not be reached while this chaos went on. He arrived late to the hospital looking disheveled and in scrubs that had been worn for numerous days. Staff noted this because there was a large hole in one bum cheek. While he was alerted to the fact that his patient was unconscious, Duntsch decided not to go and check on her, but went on to carry out another surgery. As he refused to tend to Brown, hospital officials repeatedly asked him to either look after her or transfer her out of his care. They also requested that he delay his next patient's surgery. Duntsch responded by suggesting that a hole be drilled into Brown's head to relieve the pressure in her brain, but he was refused permission. The hospital didn't have the equipment or personnel who could carry out such a task, and Duntsch himself wasn't qualified and held no privileges for brain surgery. Brown was in a coma for hours before he finally transferred her care, but by the time he did so, she was already brain dead. The Texas Medical Board later concluded that she had died of excessive blood loss and a stroke. During the operation, Duntsch had severed Brown's vertebral artery and refused to abort the procedure. He had also packed it with too much of a substance designed to stop bleeding. Duntsch's next patient, the one he insisted on operating on, even as Floella Brown was dying, was a 71-year-old woman named Mary Eford. Eford had a passion for working out and kept an active lifestyle even as she aged, and wanted to relieve some back pain she was having so that she could return to her workouts. Kissinger, who was also present during this operation, alleged that Duntsch was distracted by thoughts of Brown as he carried out Eford's surgery. Reportedly, Kissinger and his supervisors got into an argument with the surgeon about his idea to drill a hole in Brown's skull. While working on Eford's procedure, Duntsch managed to sever one of her nerve roots as he operated on the wrong part of her back. Furthermore, he twisted a screw into another nerve, left screw holes on the opposite side of her spine, failed to remove the disc he was supposed to take out, and left surgical hardware in her muscle tissue. It was so loose that it moved when touched. Although colleagues warned Duntsch that he wasn't carrying out the procedure correctly, as he was attaching the screws and hardware to muscles instead of bone, he continued anyway, as he had done many times before. Some of the staff present also felt he may have been under the influence of alcohol due to his dilated pupils. As a result of this botched operation, Mary Eford, an active and otherwise healthy 71-year-old, was left paralysed. She recalled waking up afterwards in excruciating pain, describing it as a 10+ on a scale of 1 to 10. A veteran spine surgeon named Robert Henderson performed the salvage surgery, meant to best repair the damage Duntsch had done. He likened what he found when he opened Efford up to the results of a child playing with a construction set, like Tinker Toys. In the Oxygen documentary License to Kill, Henderson stated, "Immediately upon opening the patient's prior scar, I could see a screw penetrating that dural sac from the left side of the bottom. It was just wobbly there. It was like someone just threw some Tinker Toys in there, or an erector set in there. I had absolutely zero comprehension of how this surgeon could think that he had done the procedure correctly." He found 3 holes in Efford's spinal column, where Duntsch had attempted to insert screws, failing each time. He had also amputated one of her nerve roots, and a screw had skewered the nerves that control one leg and the bladder. Henderson also described the operation as an assault and concluded that Efford would have been bedridden the remainder of her life if not for the salvage surgery. Duntsch's ineptitude led the older surgeon to question whether or not he really was who he said he was, and questioned if he actually had a degree. Henderson could not fathom that a real surgeon could and would botch the operation so badly. He felt that anyone with a basic understanding of human anatomy would know that he was working on the wrong portion of Mary's back. Henderson decided to send Duntsch's photo off to the University of Tennessee, which confirmed that he'd graduated. He then called Duntsch's fellowship supervisors in Memphis, as well as the super of his residency. It was here that Henderson learned that the surgeon had spent some time in a program for impaired physicians. Still, despite Henderson's findings and the fact that Duntsch had bungled 2 operations, leading to the death of 1 woman, he was not reported to the NPDB. At this time, hospitals were not required to report doctors who only had temporary privileges, a loophole that allowed Dr. Death to continue destroying the lives of his patients. After resigning from Dallas Medical Center, Duntsch began working at Southampton Community Hospital in Dallas, where he received privileges to carry on operating. The hospital already had a questionable background and reputation. It had suffered 2 bankruptcies, and a former CEO was sentenced to prison for healthcare fraud. At the same time, Duntsch also took up a position at an outpatient clinic named Frisco Ambulatory Surgery Center, located in Frisco in Collin County and Denton County. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, doctors were finally filing complaints about Duntsch. The Texas Medical Board was alerted to his surgeries on Efford and Brown. And after catching wind of these cases, Randall Kirby, who had had dealings with Duntsch in the past, also gave his 2 cents to the medical board, telling them Duntsch has got to be stopped. Kirby also contacted Dr. Frederick Boop at the University of Tennessee and spoke to officials at Baylor Plano Hospital. A few months went by and neither Kirby nor Henderson heard anything further. They were unaware, however, that Duntsch was continuing to operate. In September 2012, Jeff Cheney, a father of 3 and grandfather of 6, came to Duntsch when he wanted to relieve the pain he had, which moved from his shoulder to his arm. Cheney recalled, "Dr. Duntsch assured me I'd be 100% pain-free immediately after the surgery. He definitely had confidence." However, the moment he woke up from his operation, he realized that something was wrong. It felt like I'd been run over by a steamroller. He was unable to move anything on the right side of his body. Dr. Duntsch looked down at me and he said, "I don't know why you're like this. I don't know why you're this way. Everything went perfect in there." But everything hadn't gone perfect. It couldn't have, not with Duntsch's track record. It turned out that while operating on Cheney, the surgeon had damaged his spinal cord, which left him without any feeling in the right side of his body. He also had debilitating pain, which had caused him to quit his job as a mechanic and stay home. 2 months later, Jacqueline Troy came to Duntsch. During the surgery, he cut one of her arteries, one of her vocal cords, and damaged her trachea. Tori was left barely able to speak above a whisper, had been sedated for weeks on end, and had to be fed through a tube to avoid the substance simply going into her lungs. She later told the court, "It was like a nightmare. I woke up in a nightmare." Her esophagus had been pinned under a plate near her spine, and Duntsch had poked holes in her trachea. He'd left her with one vocal cord. Her surgery was described by another doctor as an unmitigated disaster. Notably, Randall Kirby was asked to help Troy after she began suffering from a severe infection. It was then that he discovered Duntsch was still operating and still bungling every surgery that he touched. Following Troy's botched operation, Duntsch was finally reported to the NPDB by the Methodist Hospital in McKinney, Dallas, after they had denied him privileges in mid-2012 because they noticed his substandard or inadequate care at Baylor Plano. On April 9, 2013, Philip Mayfield was scheduled to undergo a simple 45-minute procedure. A professional truck driver of 20 years who had previously served in the Navy. Mayfield loved his job, but it caused him issues because he was sitting for such lengthy periods. According to Duntsch, the operation went well, but when Mayfield's wife, Angela, saw him in the recovery room, she immediately knew that something was wrong. Her husband was unable to hold himself up. He had no control, no support of his own. He was just flopping around, Angela told Esquire magazine. She reported that Mayfield was then taken to another hospital and given another doctor, but the damage had already been done. His spinal cord was deformed, and there was nothing that could be done to fix it. Mayfield stated, "They told me I'd never be able to walk again, but I told them, yes I will walk again. I have a life that I have to live. I have 3 boys I need to raise." Mayfield's surgery had taken several hours, and his spinal cord had been damaged because Duntsch had drilled into it, leaving him partially paralyzed from the neck down. He eventually regained his ability to walk with the assistance of a cane, but lived with chronic pain, fainting spells, and developed syringomyelia, a painful condition that caused cysts on his spinal cord. "My pain level would get so high, it stimulates the autonomic nervous system, and I'm passing out. You call the paramedics around here, you don't even have to give them the address. They already know they are talking about me," he told the docuseries License to Kill. In January of 2021, Mayfield began a new treatment for his condition. 3 doses in, he was diagnosed with COVID-19 and died on February 12th that year, aged just 50, and leaving his wife and 3 sons behind. Duntsch's next victim was Marshall Tex Muse, an avid runner who had begun to suffer from degenerative disc disease. Upon meeting the surgeon, Muse recalled, "He took my x-rays and he said, 'You should have had surgery 5 years ago. We need to get you in and get you in now.'" However, the day before he was due to go in for surgery, Muse stumbled upon an article about the death of schoolteacher Kelly Martin, whose demise came at Duntsch's hands. Muse told License to Kill, "I called Dr. Duntsch up and I said, 'I saw this online.' Immediately he started yelling and cussing at me, saying, 'How dare you? I can't believe that you're accusing me of killing someone.' He said the patient died from having an allergic reaction to the anesthesia." Satisfied by his explanation, Muse went ahead with the operation. However, he woke up afterwards in severe pain, likening the feeling to someone having a jackhammer with a knife in his spine. Duntsch told Muse that he was overreacting and that his pain was perfectly normal. He then prescribed the runner so much Percocet that the pharmacist refused to fill the order a second time because the doctor is going to kill the patient. As a result of the heavy painkillers, Muse spiraled into addiction and eventually lost both his job and his wife. Another doctor who reviewed the case later on determined that Duntsch had never installed the necessary hardware into the spine, and instead left it floating between the spine and muscle tissue. Shortly afterwards, Jeff Glidewell, who'd been suffering from back pain since he'd been in a motorcycle accident in 2004, sought out Duntsch for an operation. He'd been looking for a reputable surgeon to carry it out when he stumbled across video testimony from a woman named Pam Trusty. Trusty had once praised Duntsch for his work in a recording, thinking that she was part of a video for an award the surgeon was receiving for his work and skills, but actually, Duntsch just wanted to use the recording as part of an infomercial. He had asked her to participate during a follow-up appointment, where she had complained that she still had been feeling pain since her operation with him. He told her that it was normal, and Trusty now considers herself lucky, stating, "I could walk, and I was on this top side of the ground." However, she lives in guilt that her endorsement caused others, including Glidewell, to stick with Duntsch for surgery, stating, "I felt like it was because of me, and the words that will forever haunt me is that he was one great man. Glidewell already had reservations about going forward with his operation when he was confronted with multiple black cats crossing the road on his way to the hospital. A superstitious individual, he suggested to his wife that they return home, but she encouraged him to get the operation done. In the hospital, Glidewell was forced to wait for several hours while hooking up to an IV as he waited for his surgeon to appear. Duntsch arrived 3 hours late in a taxi. Glidewell recalled he had on jeans that were frayed at the bottom. He didn't look like he was ready for surgery. Hours later, Glidewell's wife Robin was told by Duntsch that they'd aborted the surgery because they'd found what appeared to be a tumour. When Glidewell woke, he asked, "Where is the doctor? I can't move my arm or my leg." Robin also noted that he was having trouble talking. Randall Kirby was approached to resolve the situation, while Glidewell was moved to another hospital. Kirby found that the incision made in Glidewell's back was in the wrong place. Furthermore, Duntsch had put a hole the size of a silver dollar in his esophagus, taken out a nerve, cut an artery, and left a surgical sponge in the body. It was quickly apparent why the sponge had been left. If removed, Glidewell would certainly bleed to death. However, as a result of Duntsch's horrific butchering, Kirby noticed that the patient had become septic and had a bad blood-borne infection. Worse, the supposed tumour that Duntsch had spotted was actually just muscle. Kirby told the docuseries License to Kill, "I have never seen a case like Mr. Glidewell's. This was attempted murder, and it wasn't the first time. In my opinion, we had a serial killer in our medical community." Duntsch refused to help fix the colossal damage he had done. Kirby described his colleague's work as that of a crazed maniac, and said that it looked as if Duntsch had tried to decapitate Glidewell. He contended that the surgery had been so badly botched that it was unprecedented and had not happened in the United States of America before. Glidewell had undergone more than 50 procedures in the years since to try and rectify the damage done by Duntsch, but he still suffers from the ill effects of the surgery. By the time of Glidewell's botched surgery, the Texas Medical Board had already begun investigating Duntsch, and had been for around 10 months. Surgeon Robert Henderson was so frustrated that Duntsch was still operating that he called the board himself and begged them to suspend his sentence while they investigated, but they wouldn't. Meanwhile, Randall Kirby penned a 5-page letter in June of 2013, following everything that had unfolded with Glidewell's operation. He called Duntsch a sociopath and wrote that he must be stopped from practicing medicine. On June 26th, Duntsch was ordered by the board to stop operating. This came after a news reporter named Brett Shipp caught wind of the story and approached the board about it. The board reportedly felt that it was highly improbable that a surgeon who'd been through training could lack so much skill, and thus they didn't want to jump to conclusions. His biggest critics, however, feared that this wouldn't be the end for Duntsch. Henderson recalled, "I was terrified of that term, suspended. I mean, that indicates that he might get it back at some point in time, and I was already aware of the fact of how glib Dr. Duntsch was, and how disarming he was, and how friendly and intelligent he appeared whenever he introduced himself to people that he wanted to impress. I was concerned that he would do the same thing in getting his license back, whether it was 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later." The medical board had veteran surgeon Martin Lazar review the case. Lazar was heavily critical of Duntsch's work, and like many others, couldn't believe how incompetent the trained surgeon was. He noted how he often missed the fact that his patients were bleeding out. As a result of the assessment, on December 6, 2013, Duntsch's medical license was revoked. Following the loss of his license, the former surgeon moved to Denver, Colorado, and went into a downward spiral. On January of 2014, the police arrested him for drunk driving when he was found driving on the wrong side of the road with 2 flat tires. He was sent to a detox facility afterwards. He was also taken for a psychological evaluation in Dallas while visiting his children, and was arrested in the city for attempting to steal over $800 worth of merchandise from a Walmart. In one particular incident in March of 2015, the police were called to a bank in northeast Dallas where passers-by reported a man found to be Duntsch, with blood on his hands, beating his face against the doors. He was babbling about his family being in danger, wearing the shirt of his black scrubs and covered in blood. 3 months later, the Texas Observer published an article online titled "Sociopath Surgeon Duntsch Arrested for Shoplifting Pants," referencing his attempt to steal from Walmart. In the comments section beneath the article, Duntsch could be seen ranting and raving at the critics. It ran to more than 80 pages when printed. Some of the comments were directed at Randall Kirby, and he commented that Barry Morgueloff's surgery was a perfect success. In response to all of this, took the comments to the Dallas District Attorney's office. A judge who knew Jeff Glidewell personally had already brought the case in front of the DA. Assistant District Attorney Michelle Shugart took over the case, speaking to Duntsch's patients with her team so they could figure out the best course of action and decide what to charge the former surgeon with. Ultimately, Duntsch was charged with 5 counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of injury to an elderly person, Mary Efford. The DA's office believed their best plan of action was to pursue this latter charge, as it provided the widest sentencing range and would be the easiest to prove in court. Potentially for this crime, Duntsch could land life in prison, but investigators had to hurry because the statute of limitations was close to running out. On July 21, 2015, Duntsch was arrested and taken into custody. He awaited his trial for 2 years. In the meantime, at least 19 of his patients received settlements. 14 of them were represented by Kay Van Way, who had taken on the clients because of a sense of justice rather than financial gain. For a long time, Duntsch's victims had looked to sue him for malpractice, but struggled to find a lawyer in the state who would take on their case due to a reform of tort law in Texas in 2003, which reduced the amount of money which could be won. As a result, the number of malpractice suits in the state had dropped by more than half. Duntsch's trial began on February 2, 2017. Mary Efford, along with many of the former surgeon's other victims, testified to show his pattern of behaviour. Robbie McClung, Duntsch's lead defence attorney, stated, "You had people in walkers, you had people on crutches, you had people that could barely move, you had people that had lost loved ones, you had all sorts of things that had gone wrong. Before we even get to Mary Efford, you can see that it's just going downhill. I mean, it's going downhill fast." Duntsch, for his part, reportedly remained calm and collected, confident in his own skill, but appeared to deflate when Martin Nazar and other surgical experts walked the jury through his missteps. One of the main witnesses in the case was Duntsch's ex-girlfriend and assistant, Kimberly Morgan, who noted he was kind to his patients' faces, but angry and confrontational behind closed doors. Morgan was asked to read out a portion of an email Duntsch had sent her in the early hours of December 11, 2011, just before he operated on Lee Passmore at Baylor Plano. The email's subject line read, "Occam's razor," and the message itself consisted of 5 pages of cursing and rambles. Then towards the end it read, "Unfortunately, you cannot understand that I am building an empire, and I am so far outside the box that the earth is small and the sun is bright. I am ready to leave the love and kindness and goodness and patience that I mix with everything else, that I am able to become a cold-blooded killer." This is the section Morgan read out in court. Duntsch's defense blamed his actions on poor training and a lack of oversight by the hospitals, but the prosecution countered that his email showed he knew what he was doing. They also argued that his failure to learn from past mistakes demonstrated that his maiming of Mary Efford was intentional. Furthermore, they laid some of the blame on the hospitals that employed Duntsch, and added that he was motivated to keep operating because the money he was earning would help him reduce his mounting financial issues. The 13-day trial eventually came to a close, and the jurors deliberated for a few hours before reaching a decision. They found Duntsch guilty of 1 count of injury to an elderly person. On February 20, 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison. To this day, Duntsch is still behind bars at the O.B. Ellis unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Huntsville, 1 hour outside of Houston. On September 18, 2017, his attorney filed an appeal, stating that the testimony of other victims and the email read aloud by Kimberly Morgan were used to unfairly influence the jury. However, this appeal was not successful. Duntsch is currently 51 years old and is not eligible for parole until 2045, by which point he'll be 74. When interviewed in 2018, Jerry Summers, who had previously been friends with Duntsch, was unable to answer why he had trusted him as a surgeon. He said he knew his friend could barely drive a car without getting lost, but he'd assumed Duntsch had been better trained for neurosurgery. Duntsch's disturbing case highlights not only the flaws in the reporting system for those in the medical field, but also that killers are not shaped like the boogeyman. They are often normal civilians living ordinary lives. In this particular instance, Duntsch was a man who was supposed to save lives, but he abused his trust and his power to play God, leaving in his wake damage that was at best irreversible, and worst, fatal.